For generations, the Jedi have been treated like saints, warriors of light, defenders of peace, protectors of the innocent. But if you actually watch how history unfolded, that image starts to crack. Because the more you look, the more it seems like every time the Jedi showed up, the galaxy got worse, not better. They called themselves peacekeepers, but they led armies. They preached detachment, but feared emotion. They claimed to bring balance, but every one of their victories led to imbalance somewhere else. The truth is, the Jedi weren't protectors. They were participants, fueling the very wars they were meant to prevent. And what's worse is that they never questioned it. They never stopped to ask whether their presence was actually helping. When they sat in their temples debating destiny, the galaxy burned around them. But the Jedi were too blinded by their own mythology to see it. By the time the Order fell, the galaxy didn't cry. It exhaled. For once, the Force could breathe again. Because maybe after thousands of years of Jedi rule, the universe had finally learned how to stand without them. And that's the uncomfortable truth no one in Star Wars wants to admit. The galaxy may not need the Jedi anymore. In fact, it might be better off without them. In this video, we're going to explore why the Jedi's downfall wasn't a tragedy. It was a necessity. Why their legacy is more complicated than we like to believe. And why the galaxy might finally be ready to move on from the Jedi for good. For thousands of years, the Jedi called themselves the Keepers of Peace, but if you look closely at Star Wars history, every time the Jedi get involved, peace seems to vanish faster than a moisture farm during drought season. Their presence is always followed by conflict, civil war, or collapse, and yet somehow they're still treated like sacred icons of morality. Maybe it's time we actually ask whether the galaxy ever truly needed them in the first place. The Republic relied on the Jedi like a crutch, treating them as superhuman fixers who could solve every crisis. When pirates attacked, call the Jedi. When trade disputes broke out, send in the Jedi. They became diplomats, soldiers, and sometimes executioners, blurring every line they were supposed to uphold. That dependency created a false peace built on lightsabers instead of logic. Take the prequel era, for instance. The Jedi claimed to serve the Senate, but by the end they were commanding entire armies, turning from monks into military officers almost overnight. And they didn't even question it. When the clone army appeared, no one in the council bothered to ask who ordered it or why it existed. They just accepted the convenience and jumped headfirst into the Clone Wars like it was destiny. That blind acceptance was the first clue that the Jedi weren't wise. They were conditioned. Centuries of ritual and doctrine had trained them to see obedience as virtue. They mistook service for morality. When Palpatine pulled the strings, they didn't even notice the web tightening around them, because they were too busy following their own rules to see who was writing them. Even their idea of balance is suspicious when you think about it. Balance doesn't mean silence, but to the Jedi it did. They equated emotion with danger, attachment with weakness, and compassion with risk. Yet those are the very things that make life worth living. In their quest to purge darkness, they ended up extinguishing light. The Jedi were built on fear, not peace. Fear of anger, fear of loss, fear of love. Everything was about control. They didn't trust the Force. They tried to domesticate it. They built temples on worlds brimming with life, then told people not to feel too much of it. And they wondered why so many of their own students fell to the dark side. Every major Jedi tragedy begins with that denial of emotion. Anakin wasn't corrupted because he loved too deeply. He was corrupted because he wasn't allowed to love at all. The council taught him that his feelings were wrong, and when he finally gave in to them, he was consumed. The tragedy isn't that he broke the rules, it's that the rules were broken to begin with. The Jedi believed they were protecting the galaxy from darkness, but really they were suppressing its nature. You can't erase pain or passion. They're as much a part of existence as light and life. The Jedi tried to turn sentient beings into stone statues of serenity, and the result was stagnation disguised as harmony. The galaxy doesn't stay peaceful because people stop fighting. It stays peaceful because people learn why they shouldn't. The Jedi never taught that lesson. They taught restraint without understanding, obedience without empathy. And that's why every time they vanished, the galaxy simply found new ways to survive without them. Maybe the reason the galaxy keeps losing faith in the Jedi isn't because it's fallen, but because it's evolved beyond them. Every empire they fight, every dark side they fear, is just the galaxy's reaction to being suffocated by their order. Maybe the Force is tired of being told how it's supposed to feel. Let's talk about the aftermath of the Jedi's fall, because here's the thing, the galaxy didn't collapse when they were gone. Sure, the Empire was brutal, but what rose after the Clone Wars wasn't just tyranny, it was clarity. The Republic had rotted from the inside, and the Jedi were part of the infection. Their absence didn't destroy civilization. It exposed how fragile it really was. When the Empire rose, it didn't just replace the Republic, it replaced faith with fear. And yet somehow people survived. Entire worlds learned to live without the Jedi's guidance, building their own defenses, their own communities, their own heroes. Star Wars has always shown that hope doesn't come from a robe and a lightsaber, it comes from those who dare to stand without them. Think about characters like Cassian Andor or Jyn Erso. They fought for freedom without ever touching the Force. Or Han Solo, who had zero interest in destiny, but still became one of the galaxy's most important figures. These people didn't need Jedi dogma to find meaning, they just needed something to believe in. Even Luke, the golden boy of the rebellion, discovered the same truth. By the time of The Last Jedi, he understood that the Jedi legacy wasn't pure. It was flawed, cyclical, and self-destructive. He recognized that the Force doesn't belong to anyone, least of all to an ancient order that thought it had exclusive rights to wisdom. And that's the real irony. The Jedi wanted to free the galaxy from fear, but they ended up making everyone afraid of failure. You can't grow when perfection is the only standard. The galaxy doesn't need saints. It needs survivors. People who can make mistakes and still stand up again. Not those who pretend they are above falling at all. When you strip away the myth, the Jedi were just one interpretation of the Force, not its truth. Their teachings were one philosophy in a galaxy full of others. The Night Sisters, the Guardians of the Wills, the Bendu, all proved that the Force doesn't need a council to explain it. It just needs those willing to listen. The Jedi's arrogance blinded them to diversity of thought. To them, the Force was binary, light or dark, peace or passion. But the galaxy doesn't work like that. It thrives in the grey areas. The Jedi's obsession with control is exactly why their order kept collapsing over and over again. If anything, the galaxy flourished more when people stopped waiting for the Jedi to fix everything. The rebellion was built on everyday courage, not Jedi prophecy. The resistance rose from ordinary people, not ancient bloodlines. And those victories were cleaner because they weren't tied to the moral baggage of a failing religion. That's the uncomfortable truth. Maybe the Jedi were never the solution. They were the symptom. They represented the galaxy's fear of chaos, not its mastery over it. And in that fear, they forgot that peace isn't the absence of struggle. It's learning how to live with it. If the Force truly seeks balance, maybe that balance begins when the Jedi finally let go. So what would a galaxy without Jedi actually look like? Well, for one thing, it wouldn't be chaos, it would be freedom. For the first time, people could explore the Force without being judged or policed by a religious elite. It would be messy, sure, but it would also be authentic. And maybe, just maybe, that's what balance really looks like. Imagine a world where the Force is understood by scholars, shamans, and soldiers alike. Where the light isn't confined to temples, and the dark isn't shunned into secrecy. A galaxy where people learn to control their own power responsibly instead of outsourcing morality to an ancient order. That's not heresy. That's evolution. Star Wars has already flirted with this idea. In Rebels, Kanan teaches Ezra to trust his instincts instead of suppress them. In The Mandalorian, Din and Grogu show that family and attachment can be sources of strength, not weakness. Even Rey's journey, flawed as it was, hinted that the Force doesn't belong to institutions, it belongs to everyone. Maybe that's what Yoda finally realised before he became one with the Force. That the Jedi weren't meant to last forever, they were a step in the Force's own evolution. The galaxy doesn't need them to enforce balance anymore, it needs them to accept that balance can exist without them. If you look closely, the Force has always been teaching this lesson. From Qui-Gon's compassion to the Bendu's neutrality, the Force speaks through those who don't fit into the system. The problem is that the Jedi kept trying to build fences around something meant to flow. You can't cage the wind and then wonder why the air grows still. The legacy of the Jedi isn't peace, it's persistence. They keep coming back because the galaxy keeps mistaking order for harmony. But every rebirth is smaller, every council weaker, every prophecy less certain. Maybe that's the Force slowly phasing them out, like a teacher letting go of a student who no longer needs guidance. Without the Jedi, people wouldn't lose the light. They'd finally see it in themselves. The farmers, the smugglers, the scientists, they'd all have a chance to find meaning without hierarchy. The galaxy would finally stop worshipping symbols and start understanding substance. And the Force, unshackled, would return to being what it always was, a living, breathing energy that doesn't care about titles or temples. The Jedi may have been born from its will, but they don't own it. They were just one verse in an endless song that will keep playing long after their temples have turned to dust. So maybe the question isn't whether the galaxy needs the Jedi, it's whether the Jedi ever truly understood the galaxy. Because from where we're standing, it looks like the Force has already moved on. Maybe it's time everyone else did too.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.